Everyone, Fabian here. So I am going to do this somewhat of a free flowing. I've tried to see if I could do this scripted. Nah, that's not gonna work. So what I want to talk about today is how I spent my last Saturday and Sunday, basically the weekend, and I dub it a test drive weekend because I subscribe to Claude Code. And I went with the $20 per month plan with the intention that I didn't want to change the workflow that I have too much when I'm actually, doing my own coding, which is my weekend hackathons that I usually do. And currently what that is using a combination of ChatGPT, using a combination of GitHub Copilot, largely copying and pasting. When I'm working with ChatGPT in GitHub Copilot, I may actually just accept things and make the changes inside the editor. But everyone's talking about Claude Code and how Sonnet is one of the best, code LLMs. Wanted to give it a shot. So I'm using a community project that I have been working on. It's tied to breweries. The objective, if I'm starting from the bullet point at the bottom, is all around observability. But in order to create an observability solution, you need to have something already created so that you can observe it. So this solution is using the latest of technology. I want to basically be on the bleeding edge, so I'm building forward, basically skating to where the puck is going, as people usually say. So this is going to incorporate MCP, Model Context Protocol, A2A, agent to agent, and also it is going to leverage a interface with a Node.js app. I'm using Azure Functions for the MCP, which is a good point because most MCP examples that you see out there today are largely around standard I/O, STD I/O, and that's easy because it's on your computer, it runs as a process, it is going to work. If you're doing a remote MCP server, then you have to figure out auth, you have to figure out latency in between your calls to the internet, and you're using a different protocol. Then you're going to be using SSE, server sent events, or you're going to be using streaming HTTP. And I've had problems with both, which we're going to talk about here. So without further ado, let's dive right in so you can actually see what my weekend drive-by is. The first thing I'm going to say is that I think when you're using Claude Code, it kind of expects that you're starting off net new because it says, describe your idea. So blank canvas where you can basically create a CLAUDE.md file, which it will use to describe what you're building and actually, partner with you with that file as a basis of understanding and build forward. In my case, I already have 3 projects, a project for the Node.js, a project for one Azure function that actually does a lot of the work and the heavy lifting, and one is an Azure function that purposes as an MCP server. And I'm using an example from Microsoft that I think Matt Slocum did. I'll link to that somewhere. That shows how to do that with some latest bits inside. I think they're still experimental in Azure function to get that to work. So that's why I wanted to separate that function into 2. Now, the first thing I'm going to say is that running init is your friend. So it's once you install Claude Code, which is as simple as an npm command, and then you go inside and then you just type Claude inside a terminal. And by the way, using a terminal also is genius because it keeps you in the flow of work. And if I'm using Visual Studio Code as I normally do as my IDE, then I usually have multiple terminals going anyway. One where I'm testing and debugging, one where I'm just building and just to keep things so I can just, flip through my history. So adding one more just for Claude made a ton of sense. So the /init that you see here allows it to look at your directory and then create that CLAUDE.md file if it doesn't already exist, and it creates that understanding for you. And what I also love about it is that it creates a diff for you. So if you're starting from nothing, it's empty, and then you have that new file, it allows you to read through it, which is important. I guess I'll speak about it now because if you notice here on the screen, you'll notice there's 3 folders already inside this larger folder that's called AMA. Initially, I thought, well, this is just ignorance playing out, right? So I didn't know how Claude Code worked. I had one project. The way my structure is set up right now, I have CI/CD per GitHub repo, and they're all doing different things because one's Node, one's Azure Functions. And what I didn't have is a structure that tied all 3 of them together. But in order for Claude Coding to see everything, you need to have it, you need to be launching it inside a terminal that can see all of the folders. So I had to create a larger folder and prop everything inside there. Initially, I'd done it where I only had one folder and thought that I could actually, use two different terminals and have them talk to each other, but that does not work. Now, the diff is important because later on you'll see that I have a fourth folder in here, and that is because I wanted to give Claude Code an example of that GitHub repo that I talked about from the Microsoft Learn that Matthew Socom created. By cloning it, I pulled it down and I added another folder inside this one, and I said, okay, this is just a sample folder, but then I ran another init so I could actually see it. It thought it was part of the original folder structure, and I had to stop it, which is good because usually it'll ask you questions and you have a chance to interrupt it to say, no, don't do that. But once it's all done, it gives you a really, really nice and detailed CLAUDE.md file. And if you can read that, this is literally something you could give to a junior dev or to a dev. Let's not say junior dev and prejudice it, but you can give to any dev and they can understand. So this is exactly the contract that is now being created for you. That's what we worked with. One of the things I want to also mention is that managing limits is important. So again, there's several different Claude Code projects, plans, that you can go with. There's the free one, obviously, but then you can upgrade to the $20 per month if you're paying monthly. If you're paying annually, it is, I think, $17 per month. But I decided, because again, I didn't know what I was going to expect and what I was going to get, so I only did $20 per month. But I won't spoil it, but that was my exit hatch in case I didn't want to do it. But with that comes with 40 messages every 5 hours. So that's basically 8 messages or 8 prompts per hour. So you need to use that wisely. Fortunately, it does give you a warning to let you know that you're approaching your limit, and it does reset. Now, on day 1 on Saturday, I didn't hit my limit. In fact, I worked for quite some time, and by 12, I basically said, I need to take a break anyway. And when I came back, I was still within my limits. But on Sunday, I wanted to push the envelope, so I definitely got this warning. Definitely, kept going, and it did, create that limit for me and said that, you're done, until basically 5 p.m., which was, I think, around 50 minutes later that I needed to step away from. But what I also found out, which is pretty interesting as well, is that if you're logged in using the same account in both Claude Desktop and in Claude Code, the limits are shared. So I can't even chat. I can't even do anything else. I'm not even sure if I went from Claude 4 Sonnet down to something else lower, if it would give it back to me, but I don't know. But the subscribing to Max was not going to be an option. I'm not going to pay $100 or $200, per month for this, because I have GitHub Copilot and I also have ChatGPT, and I can go do something else if I do hit my limits. The next 4 screens I'm going to show you is a part of, I think, the most important part of the journey that I went through, that I want to make sure that you understand, because I did post this earlier. I think the fact that I have a dev background, it helped me to manage my limits, because I knew how to articulate what I wanted to do. And if things started to go off the rails, I could actually catch it. You're going to see some of that here. But by describing things modular, and even if you give it a big picture, say that you want to do things milestones, task orientated, experiment, test. If you come from it with a logical or a scientific background, I think you will be better off in terms of the result that you get, plus also saving you money and not hitting your limits. Now, I want to show you this one because Claude did misfire, and I should pause here because it's an important thing. It's not that it didn't know what it needed to do. It's just the fact that this landscape is evolving, and if you're doing remote MCP servers, the people are going to say that you need to be doing server-sent events, or, as I mentioned before, streaming HTTP. The problem is that server-sent events are being deprecated. You see it on Anthropic side. Any docs will see that, but that is something that I guess is maybe recent. And the reason being, well, I don't know why it's being deprecated, but one of the problems that I do see when you're trying to use server-sent events and you're using a remote MCP server, again, that latency comes in. even if you're using the MCP inspector, which is a tool that they give you to use, you will, and whenever you do the NPM package, there's NPM Microsoft Model Context Protocol / inspector. When you run that, it opens up a terminal and it gives you a port that that the MCP inspector is running on with a token for the session that you're in, and you get a bunch of tracing or history to show you what's happening. And you'll notice inside there, you'll see some 500 errors, you'll see some 405 errors. If you're using a remote server, because of the latency in between. The SSC requires a persistent connection, and there should be retries to ensure that that persistence is happening between the client, which is my computer, and the server, which is in Azure Cloud. But you know, this is the internet, this is real life, there is physics involved, so sometimes something can happen. And if you're trying to invoke a tool, or you know, do a polling to see what tools are available, things can go haywire. We'll demo that in a little bit so you'll actually see it. Now that's having people move to HTTP streaming, which is basically an asynchronous connection because it's HTTP, right? So it's going to be using a stateless environment. And then you can basically throw something across the fence, get a response back, and continue to work. However, I could not get HTTP streaming to work to save my life. And I went back to SSC because SSC just, even though it's not working 100%, it does work. So this is right here saying that we're going to replace HTTP transport with SSC after I realized it wasn't working. And it said down here, you know, this streaming HTTP implementation provides the best of both worlds. So it's going to try and do it for me. And you'll notice inside here, it says it got a 404 when it's trying to hit the endpoint. It says, oh, right. And it said, let me check the correct endpoint URL and test a few more things. Here is where, because of what we've been doing before and all the tests that happened up until this point, I saw it spiraling and started to do the same thing over and over again. So I basically said, hey, what I did was stop all the Azure functions and restarted them all. Good. So this is me interrupting it before it does that because it kept getting 404. And what had really happened was that the CI/CD that I talked about, the continuous integration, continuous deployment that I have running in GitHub was not finishing, and it kept trying to test. So I basically paused it and say, let me start the servers, and so on and so forth. So it was still hanging after a while, and you know, after trying a couple different things by either using the MCP inspector or going directly after the URL, it wasn't working. And I basically told it, I said, hey, listen, you know, if we're broken, don't keep trying the same things. You know, look up the docs for HTTP streaming or from Microsoft or from Anthropic, and if all else fails, let's go back to what we know what's working, which is basically go back to SSE. And it says, you're absolutely right. You know, let me check Claude Code first. And it did a bunch of different things. And it's it kept cycling it on here. It says, you know, let me see if MCP tool will respond. And I'm saying right here, why are you halting our conversation and adding to the number of my messages? Please stop that. So again, it's like you're having a conversation with a developer. You know, you may be a senior dev and you have a junior dev coming to you and you tell them how to do something, and they go off and do something and they come back with the exact same question, not, you know, maybe not learning anything or maybe not doing it properly. So you need to pause and have that conversation, which is what I did here as well, and saying, you know, it's saying it's absolutely right, it shouldn't do that, and it course corrected. And I basically told it here, it seems that the chat works, because basically what I did, I paused it and I started to do things on my own. I tried to break down where the problems are, because again, this is either going to be the MCP remote server, my middle tier client that I have as an Azure function as well, my Node.js server, my Qdrant inside my my VM. There's a lot of things going on, and I wanted to keep, you know, going back to basic and build up to see where I think the error was. And the error, I believe, was inside how Node.js was handling it. So my client application, how it's trying to communicate with the client in order to get the tools in order to go to the MCP server. And I'll do a demo so that you can actually see it a little bit later on. So once I've given it that instructions and tell it, hey, check this instead, it started to work. So then it basically said I was right. It corrected action. And in the end, what we have here was that it came back and was able to get everything working again along the lines of what I expected. So what's the verdict? Yes, I totally love Claude Code, even a $20 plan. The dev loops are way faster and it is way smarter. And what I absolutely love is that it even does its own unit testing without me asking. It will write some Python scripts to do some stuff. It'll do curl commands. It'll build test scripts. It reads all of your files in order to figure out what it's working on in a particular file. So even looking at one file, it references others. It may see that things are happening in a different location and it fixed that. And I'm sure I could get more bang for my dollars going to the max plan, but I am not doing that. I'm not a dev by profession anymore. I'm a product manager. And this certainly helps me in having a better conversation with my engineers and my designers and everything, because I can iterate faster and show them stuff and either disprove or prove things out. But this is not my full-time day job. So with that, let me actually give you a little bit of a glimpse in terms of what I am building so that you can actually see it working. So the best way to show this is to, let's first look inside. Remember, this is all about observability, and what I'm working on at work is all about observability. That's another story. We can talk about it now later. I don't want to take up a lot of time doing that. But what we have here is, I can see 3:45, the latest log, and right now it's 5 minutes to 5 p.m. here in the East Coast of the United States. I am going to go to the MCP inspector. I'm going to reconnect this. So it says it's connected now. Oops. Well, that's actually good. So you can actually see this is not rubbish. I'm going to do a connect. It says it's connected. I'm going to list the tools, and these are all of the tools that are available in my MCP server. Again, I'm using the MCP inspector. One thing I should actually let you know as well too, we talked about this in the slide, is that now you can actually see there are some things that were happening here about server sent events, things talking about it being deprecated, by the way, so that you can see that this is not just me saying this, but you can see now it's receiving some items here as well. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to do let's do a get all beers and run that. And that's good, but that's the SSC not working. Let me go ahead and actually reconnect, clear, list tools, reconnect, list tools, do the exact same thing again, run, and see what happens this time. It came back, did nothing. That is because of the connection and the latency, because this is somewhere else. Now, if I come over here to the Aspire traces, you'll now see that there's one now at 4:55, and you can actually see the get all beers was ran. If I click into it right here, you can see that it is using the Sapwood MCP server for get all beers, and that server basically calls the other Azure function. Because remember, there's two functions. One function is an MCP server, and the other one is a real workhorse. If I click into this here, it'll say, get me a list of all of the beers of Sapwood, and it returns the other items coming back. Let's go ahead and do the exact same thing inside, let's do it inside Claude Code. So if I come over here and go to Claude Code here, and sometimes Claude Code will actually time out as well. So if I come here and do a new chat, usually the telltale sign is if I come here and it says, it is not even there, right? So it's not showing up, so it's timed down. I'm going to do something here. I'm going to come here and do a force quit on Claude, because that actually works better than me just shutting it down. And I'm going to now open up Claude again. And this takes a little time for it to make that tool call to the remote MCP server, get a list of tools, and come back. But usually what you should see inside here after a little bit is it'll just pop up inside these tools that are here, and it's not quite there yet. So while that's happening, I'll just come over here and do something else in here. So I'll come over to the MCP inspector and I'll do a search. I'll do this one here. I'm going to say, what do you have for someone who likes stouts? I'll come back to this in a minute. I just want to show you the MCP thing working first. Let's actually refresh this to make sure. come inside here, do a Control V, and do a send. So right now, this is a chat interface that I said this is a part of Node.js. It is now saying, you know, I have an agent that is running, and as you can see, it comes back and it says it found stout. It says you have a session, IPA, you have this imperial stout here, and it gave 5 items coming back. If I come over to the Aspire trace, you can see now, now it's the 457. We have these 2 items here, one of them even throwing a little bit of an error, but we can see here, again, and this is what I'm working on at work, is the ability to, when an agent is doing something. So think about this. This is my Node.js app communicating with my MCP server, which is an Azure function in the context of an MCP server that is now also using Azure functions to communicate with a Qdrant database that is there. In fact, if we look at this here, you can see it. The trace, we have the MCP client handler, which is a client interface that I have that communicates with the MCP server. It gets the tools. It knows that there are 6 tools that are there, which you saw from the MCP inspector as well. And now it needs to decide which tool to call. And the tool that it called, and that's the 4 or 5 it got because something went wrong. You either get 4 or 5 or 500 errors. It is determining the tool to use. It says, what would you suggest for someone who enjoys stouts, which is actually, is that the same thing? Yeah, it's the exact same thing. So that's the query that actually went. And then over here now, this is the API. So this is the embedding. In this embed that in order to do the search, is extracting the tool arguments here, filter, find beer by flavor, because I want stouts, and that is one of the tools that we have. And there's a couple of other things it goes through here, but in the end, as you can see, it does all of that and returns an item. All right, so with that, let's borrow that real quickly and actually come over to, we're going to run this one inside Claude and see if it'll show. There it is. Look at that. 6. Here are my 6 tools right here. So I'm going to come with that query while going is there. I'm going to come back here and do, what do you say, like from Sapper. So I'm priming it a little bit here because you got to remember that now I'm using Claude Desktop. So it needs to know what to use. So it can say find beers by flavor. I'm going to say allow once in case it wants to do another a query. It says chocolatey. Now it's doing an event search. Why it's doing an event search is beyond me. But again, non-deterministic. Now it wants to do a get all beers. So now it's doing a couple different items. So if I come over actually inside here, under Aspire and get out of this trace and go back to traces, you're probably going to see there it is, the get flavor by note. This is 502. If I click inside here, you can see it's doing a federated search. This is another one of the Azure function search that's there. Let's actually click into it. It should probably tell you that we're looking for the stout one. That's just the that's a sanity. Where's the one where it actually? Oh, there it is. Find beers that taste like chocolate, coffee, or cocoa, which is not necessarily not the query that we actually sent, right? So the query that we actually sent is something that what would you suggest someone enjoys stouts? But it basically is describing what stouts are, and it's still at this get this guy here. Let's see what it actually came back with stuff here, right? Under the find beer by flavor, it actually came back with an answer. So if we came over here and look under traces and look under here, the answer is there, right? So if I do generate, that's the generate embedding, the Qdrant, it found 10 items coming back and it sent the item back. We just can't see it as yet. The event search is garbage. It shouldn't even be doing this one. But again, this is just playing around. You know, stout proper dark beer is the query that's actually being sent over, but that has nothing to do with an event. But we're still going. So it's still thinking about it. Again, it's the latency is that issue that we're working with. But I can show you something that worked before because it actually is a narrative search that it's actually going to do. If I come in, oh, that's the one that actually did a cache narrative search. This one here. Let me go back one more, just make sure. This one here. Yeah. So this one here, you can actually see it's a narrative search that's being done. Do you have anything that was a strong British influence AL? That's the one I showed you before. There's a Redis cache that I actually have running as well, but you can see how it gives the result coming back here saying we have some bears with a British influence and so on and so forth. And that was the one that if we come back here, British AL, you can see the answers coming back with a narrative search, and it gives you the answer down here. So again, this is all about observability, but what Claude Code gave me was the ability to churn out this MCP server, trying out HTTP streaming, going back to server-sent events, which, by the way, I was blocked on the last time I was working on it, but it really did a ton of work. It used the example from Microsoft to actually get the job going. In fact, do I have that example up here anywhere? Hold on. Yep, here it is, from Matt Selkup, as I mentioned before. So I'll put this inside the chat, but there's a video and there's good walkthrough in terms of how I'm doing this. And this, but what I did here was actually use the GitHub repo. Here's this right here. I basically cloned this repo and pulled it down and gave it in fact, there it is right here. Actually, if I come over here, this is the exact repo that I cloned and then have Claude Code do an init against this, so you can actually see how to build this for me. So that is it in a nutshell. Thank you for sticking around. I know it's a little bit long one and it's unscripted, but hopefully you learned a ton. All right. Don't know why it's doing that. Thank you very much. Take care.